At that time, Rebekah came out to draw water. Just like I said, it was about the time of day when they came out to draw water, and Rebekah did that. She came to the well to draw water. She was very beautiful, and she was a virgin. So the servant ran to meet Rebekah. Doesn't say why he ran, but he ran to meet Rebekah. And he asked Rebekah for a drink of water, just like he's laid out for God in his prayer. And Rebekah took the pitcher off her shoulder, gave him a drink, and said, "I'll water your camels also." And she did that. And again, that's no small task, because he had how many camels? He had 10 camels, right? And camels are notorious for the amount of water that they're going to drink. And so she's taken on a big task. And it stands out to me a little bit too, because we'll see in a little bit, I don't think she's coming from a poor family at all. She has a nurse. She has maids that are going to go back with her back to meet Isaac. And so she's not in a poor family, it doesn't seem, and yet she's the one who's coming out to draw the water. So I think that says a lot about Rebekah too and her family. There's one more thing that the servant has to find out. Abraham told him he wanted somebody for Isaac from his family, from Abraham's family. And so the servant takes a golden nose ring and some bracelets, and he puts them on Rebekah. And he asked her, "Whose daughter are you?" Hoping it would be in Abraham's family, I'm sure. "And is there room in your father's house to lodge?" Well, Rebekah tells the servant she was the daughter of Bethuel, who was the son of Nahor, and that there was room to lodge. Now, when somebody asks me who I am, I don't generally say much more than, well, my name's Johnny George. I don't say I'm Johnny George, the son of Nelson George, the son of William George. And I'm not sure that she did that. Maybe the servant asked enough questions to get all of this out of her. But at this point, the servant has to be ecstatic. He has a lady who has done everything that he asked God for the lady to do. Draw the water for him and draw the water for the camels. And she's in the right family. She's related to Abraham. And what does he do? He takes a moment to worship the Lord. I think it was I'm pretty sure it was in some of Wayne's slides that I saw, where he mentioned how important it is for us when sometimes we just have a moment in time. We don't have 30 minutes or an hour to make a prayer to God. We just have a moment in time, like this servant, to take that moment to thank God or to worship him, to use that moment because God has blessed us. That's what the servant's done. And again, I think we can probably see Abraham's influence on him there. So Rebekah goes to tell her family about it. Laban is her brother. We'll read more about Laban when we talk about Jacob and Rachel and Leah. And it says in chapter 24 and verse 30, "So it came to pass when he, Laban, saw the nose ring and the bracelets on his sister's wrist, and when he heard the words of his sister Rebekah saying, 'Thus the man spoke to me,' that he went to the man." I couldn't help but think, was Moses giving us some insight, some early insight into who Laban was? Because we know how Laban dealt with Jacob. He's a deceiver himself. Was Moses giving us some insight into Laban, that he's interested in this gold and wants to meet this man who's handing out these kind of gifts? I don't know. But he does go to meet the servant. And he says, "Come into our house, and we'll provide a place for the camels." And there was food provided for the camels. And all of Abraham's servants, I don't know how many there was more than just one though, were provided water to wash their feet, and food was provided for the servant. And I think we see in the next thing where this servant had taken on Abraham's nature in a way. You know, for the longest, we've been talking about every time God gave Abraham something to do, did he put it off? No, he didn't. He went to it and he did it immediately. Well, it seems like the servant is doing the same thing. He said he wouldn't even eat until he told the family what he was doing up there. And he told them, Abraham, his master, God has blessed tremendously. He's a very rich man. And Sarah, his wife, had a son in their old age. And they've given everything that they have to their son Isaac. Abraham wants a wife from his family for Isaac. And he told them about how he had prayed to God at the well and how Rebekah had done everything that he had prayed about there at the well. And so he says to them, he asked the family, will you let her go to be Isaac's wife? And Bethuel and Laban answer him and say, this is from God. There's no need for us to answer this. She can go. It seems strange to me that Laban had any part in answering this, and maybe this is something that y'all can help me with. Bethuel, her dad, sure, he would have the right to say she can go or she can stay or whatever. But why is Laban speaking up? I don't know the answer for that. Maybe it was just the custom that they had at that time. Again, the servant worshiped God, took that moment in time, the moment that he had to worship God. Because at this point, he is very happy. He's made this 500-mile trip. He wasn't going in some luxury vehicle, riding camels or walking or whatever. A long trip. He's going to a place maybe never been to before, meeting Abraham's family that he's probably never met before, on a task that isn't the easiest of tasks. And yet God has prospered him all this way, and he worships God because of it. And he gives Rebekah silver and gold presents, and he gives Laban and her mother precious things, it says. Again, it doesn't mention giving precious things to Bethuel, but to her brother and to her mother. And then at that point, after he'd taken care of his business, he and the other servants that were with him ate. This is a beautiful story. Any questions or comments? Yes, sir.
I'm glad that you presented this story in the way that you're doing it, because it might be that many people will say, well, this is a fantastic story, it's made up. But we need to believe it. And when we talk about it, we need to talk about it seriously, because we have the same God. And things can happen in the same way today if we just trust. Sometimes we're just not so patient with God, because the story is so beautiful. It has a good end, but we need to believe it. And just appreciate the way that you presented it. Hopefully, we can believe it and keep doing it the same way that you're doing it. Thank you.
Thank you. And Basilio was saying that we need to understand that this story is real, that this is not a made-up story, and that we serve the same God, and that he will prosper us as well. Any other questions or comments before we go on? Yes, sir.
I just wonder, maybe the old King James, city arose and went to Mesopotamia.
Yes, sir. Okay, and Haran is in Mesopotamia, and in a lot of the Old Testament books, you'll see that he went to Padanaram, which is another word for Mesopotamia. And so Haran was in Mesopotamia. Yes, sir. Thank you. Good question. Other questions or comments? Okay, thank you. The next morning, again, he seems like he's just like Abraham. Remember when Abraham was to go to offer Isaac up, he got up the very next morning and went to do it. Well, this servant, he gets up the very next morning and he says, send me on my way. He wants to take care of the job that he's been given. God's prospered him to this point. He wants to go. And as you would expect, the family says, hold on a minute. Let her stay for a little while longer, at least another 10 days. But the servant says, God has prospered me. please let me go. Let me go back to my master. They said, we'll let Rebekah speak for herself. And Rebekah said she would go. It takes a lot of faith on Rebekah's part. Okay? She'd never met the servant before, in all likelihood, or these other servants that are with him. In all likelihood, she had never met Abraham or Isaac before. She's fixing to travel a long ways on a camel. Not a lot of fun. But she said she would go. And her nurse and her maids go with her. Okay, so bad picture of somebody riding a camel. And the camel thought he was real pretty. But I'm sure that Rebekah had a whole lot better saddle than I did on this particular occasion. But she's going 500 miles. I went a mile or two and had enough. Okay, Rebekah becomes his wife. Before she leaves, her family says, our sister, may you become the mother of thousands of 10,000s, and may your descendants possess the gates of those who hate them. Isn't that what we've been talking about as far as Abraham for the longest? Where God has told him, you will be a great nation. And her family is telling her, we want you to become a great nation, the mother of thousands of 10,000s. And of course, she does. Okay, they get back to Canaan. And Isaac is coming up from the way of Beer Lahai. And I'm sure I'm butchering that name, but you remember that well? You remember when Hagar first left Sarah, when Sarah was treating her so badly. And she went out, and the angel of the Lord came to her and told her that she was with the child Ishmael, and that he was going to become a great nation. And she said, she named the place Beer Lahai, or the well of him who sees. Well, Isaac is coming up from that area. I don't believe he's there at that, but he's coming up from that way. Sounds like he's coming back up close to Hebron. And he went out to meditate in the field. And of course, that's a great example for all of us too, right? What better thing to do than to think about God and to meditate on his word by ourselves sometimes. He saw the camels coming. And Rebekah saw him out in the field, and she asked the servant, who is this? And the servant said, it's my master. She gets off the camel. She covers herself in a veil and goes to meet Isaac. I was asked tonight, why did she cover herself in a veil? I don't know the answer to that. Does anyone have anything that they could add to that? She covered herself. She went to meet Isaac. The servant tells Isaac all that he had done as far as the trip is concerned and bringing back Rebekah to be his wife. And then Isaac took Rebekah into Sarah's tent, and she became his wife. Again, a very beautiful story. And as has already been mentioned, it's a true story. Questions or comments about this? Norm?
If Abraham was that concerned about Isaac meeting someone who would be a good spouse for him, we all learn from that. As parents and grandparents, how concerned should we be while our kids are growing up and while our grandchildren are growing up? How much should we pray to God that they would meet someone who would be a good spouse for them and be a faithful Christian all their lives?
Very good point. Norm mentioned that Abraham went to a lot of work, expense, whatever, to find a good wife for his son Isaac. And shouldn't we see that example there, that we want to find a good spouse for our children? Start early. Good comment. Any other comments or questions? Brent?
I was just thinking about the servant's doubt. What if her vision she will not follow?
And he even repeated that as he was telling later the story. And of course, she checked the last box. When she was asked, where do you go? I will go. So there wasn't anything in the servant's mind that was not resolved. The picture that Abraham presented, he wondered.
Very good. So Brent mentioned that Rebecca checked all the boxes to allow the servant to know that this was the one. Abraham had said, angel will go for you and prepare everything for you. And what he prayed for at the well, her being in the family, and her being willing to go. Okay, good. Mike, did you have your hand up? Oh, okay. All right. Sarah was 127 years old, we learned last week, when she died. Isaac would have been 37 years old when Sarah died because she was 90 when Isaac was born. Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah as wife. And so Isaac was married approximately 3 years after Sarah died. So Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. Okay, so a couple of things from this. Apparently, Isaac and Rebekah started off well because Rebekah is comforting Isaac over the loss of his mother. And so that's good. We don't have arranged marriages here anymore. Sometimes we as parents would want to. Maybe we wouldn't. But we're commanded to love our spouses. And apparently that's what Isaac and Rebekah did back then. It was arranged for them. They didn't get to pick out who they were going with. But it works out good. The other thing is, to me, is that it's 3 years after Sarah has died, and it says that Rebekah comforted Isaac. So it tells me, or at least I believe it shows, that Isaac and Sarah had a really good relationship. That 3 years after her death, he still needed comforting. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing. Questions or comments there? Okay. Abraham married Keturah. He had 6 children by Keturah. One of them was Midian. And I think he was probably the father of the Midianites. This brings up to me something that's kind of interesting. In Genesis 16 and verse 12, it says, and he, Ishmael, shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren. That is what the angel told Hagar when she was at Beer Lahai Roi. Before Ishmael was actually born. He said, he will dwell in the presence of his brethren. Then, in Genesis chapter 37 and in verse 28, another story that you'll remember is when Joseph was thrown in the pit and he was about to be sold by his brothers. It says there, the Midianite traders passed by. So the brothers pulled Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. And they took Joseph to Egypt. Looks like the Midianites and the Ishmaelites were banded together in this group of traders. Ishmael dwelt in the presence of his brothers. The Midianites were Abraham's descendants through Keturah. Ishmaelites were Abraham's descendants through Hagar. And they dwelt amongst each other. It's so beautiful how the Bible story just flows. And everything that God promises, it happens. Before Abraham died, he sent away all of Keturah's children to the east, and he gave them gifts, but he gave all that he had to Isaac. Okay? Questions or comments about that? Okay. Abraham dies at 175 years old, lived a long life. Isaac would have been 75 at the time. Ishmael would have been 89. And Isaac and Ishmael buried him. I believe Colton brought that up a few lessons ago, how that Ishmael helped burying Abraham, so he still had some kind of relationship with either him or Isaac even after he was forced to leave Abraham's house and was in a very stressful situation there at the beginning. Still, Ishmael thought enough of Isaac or of Abraham or both to help bury Abraham. God had promised Abraham that Ishmael would be a great nation, that he would have 12 princes, and he did. And Ishmael died at 137 years old, and his relatives lived between Havilah and Shur, and that would have been toward the very south of the land. You see there on the map, Beersheba, a lot of times when we talk about the land of Israel, we talk about from Dan in the north to Beersheba in the south. Of course, they were further south than that, but that was the last probable arable area that they lived in. And so Ishmael and his descendants would have been further south than that. And again, we're beginning to see how Abraham's descendants are expanding considerably. I just want to take a second. I won't read all of this, and I think we've probably brought this up a few times already, what a great example of faith that Abraham is. And it seems important now after his death that we've read about to at least bring that back up again. Yes, he was a man. Yes, he made mistakes, but he was a great example of faith. And Hebrews 11, verses 8 through 16 talk about that somewhat. He wouldn't be in Hebrews 11 if he wasn't a man of faith. He was looking forward, it says, to the city with foundations whose architect and builder is God. He could have gone back, it says, to where he came from Haran or from Ur. He could have gone back there, but that wasn't God's plan. And he looked for someplace better than here. People, all these people, it says, were still living by faith when they died. They didn't receive the promises. And we won't receive the promise here, not the big one. The one that we're looking forward to, of being in heaven with God for eternity. We won't see that here. We have to have faith. And if we have faith like Abraham and follow after God, then, like Abraham, God won't be ashamed to be called our God. Any questions or comments real quick? Thank you for your participation.
Good evening. The definition of mindset is the established set of attitudes held by someone. It has been said that what you feed your mind becomes a mindset. And a mindset is impossible to change without changing what your mind is filled with. Romans 12:2 says, "Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect." One of the accounts that we read about in Scripture of Nehemiah, the people had a mind to work. And even while they were being attacked by their enemies, they had that mindset of getting those walls built. And we can have that same mindset of, as Christians, when we feel like we're being attacked, when we feel that sin may be prevalent in our lives, that that Satan is seeking to devour us, that we can hold fast to that mindset of knowing that this is temporary, that we have an eternal home that waits on us, that has been promised. Colossians 3 verse 2 says, "Set your minds on things that are above, not on things that are on the earth." In Romans 8, 5 through 8, it says there, "For those who live according to the flesh set their minds on the things of the flesh. But those who live according to the Spirit set their minds on things of the Spirit. For to set the mind on the flesh is death, but to set the mind on the Spirit is life and peace. For the mind that is set on flesh is hostile to God, for it does not submit to God's law. Indeed, it cannot. Those who are in the flesh cannot please God."
Isaiah 26, verse 3 says, "You keep him in perfect peace whose mind is stayed on you because he trusts in you." Also 1 Peter 1:13, "Therefore, preparing your minds for action and being sober-minded, set your hope fully on the grace that will be brought to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ." One last point that I want to make here is that is our mindset like the mind of Christ? In Philippians 2:5 it says there, "Let this mind be in you which is also in Christ Jesus, who being in the form of God did not consider it robbery to be equal with God, but made himself of no reputation, taking the form of a bondservant, and coming in the likeness of men. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death, even the death on the cross." Do we have that mindset of following Jesus, of denying ourselves? Is this something that we desire, is to look for something greater than what we have on this physical earth? If you are here tonight and you are seeking to be buried with Christ, the water is ready. Why do you wait? If sin has made its way into your life and as we just read, it brings forth death, is this something that you need to be freed from? It's only a few steps down one of these aisles. If there's anything that any way we can help you, if you would, please come forward as we now stand and sing.